I don't have the brain cells for this. Hey book nerds, it's Lucky's Universe and I am here with my first YouTube video. If you don't know who I am, you might recognize me from TikTok as the girl who does weird fanfiction parodies. This has been a long time in the running, but it's finally here, and today we are here to spill the tea on A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. And boy, do I have a lot to say. I have read this book maybe twice, maybe 3 times, making notes, and there's a lot to get through. I have a lot prepared for today, so grab your tea, grab your drink of choice, and let's get into it. Gotta gather my brain cells. A Court of Thorns and Roses. A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas is a young adult novel that is supposed to be a Beauty and the Beast retelling. I went into reading this book with an open mind because I hadn't read anything by Sarah J. Maas, and I kind of stumbled upon it by accident because I was looking for audiobooks. And yeah, so I listened to the audiobook, and not gonna lie, when I listened to it, I kind of liked it. I thought it was okay. And then I read the other parts and I started to like it a lot less, and then I actually read them in print and I fully decided I really hated this series. I'm going to do future videos on the other 2 books in the trilogy, but for now we're just going to focus on A Court of Thorns and Roses. This video will contain spoilers, so if you haven't read it yet, maybe you might not want to watch this video, but if you have, come join. I just want to start with a quick disclaimer. I fully believe in everyone being allowed to share their opinions, whether they be positive or negative. But I also want to say that I am not the be-all and end-all when it comes to books. If I say something is trash, it doesn't mean that it is trash. It also doesn't mean that people who like this book are trash. Here on this channel, we're going to promote debate, not hate. So if you agree with my opinions, leave a comment. If you disagree with my opinions, leave a comment. I am open to hearing all sides of this story. But in case you're wondering, I do actually have a degree in writing, so maybe I'm like somewhat qualified to judge. Now that that's out of the way, let's just get onto the plot. The story begins with our female protagonist, Feyre, and right off the bat, you know that Feyre is poor, Feyre is plain, Feyre is your ordinary, average, everyday girl. Feyre comes from a family who lost their fortune, so now they're kind of poor, and she's out in the forest hunting for food, Katniss Everdeen style, and she shoots a wolf, which is actually a fairy. Feyre lives in a world where there's like the human world, and then there's this magical place called Prythian, which is like a fairy world. And fairies are like this huge, mystery, scary species, and no one wants to go near them. Everyone's like, beware of the fairies. So she shoots this wolf, and it was actually a fairy, and the fairy was a friend of some High Lord at a spring court in Prythian. So this High Lord comes to Feyre's house and is like, I'm gonna kill your family, but then he's like, you know what, I'm gonna take you in place of my dead friend, and you have to come and live with me in Prythian forever, and I won't kill your family. And Feyre's like, seems legit, let's go. So Feyre comes to live with this High Lord whose name is TAMLIN at his spring court. Now there's something a little bit funny about the spring court. Everyone in the spring court wears masks, and Tamlin explains that there was this disease called the blight and some sort of curse, and like that's why the masks can't come off. And Feyre stays with this guy and this other slightly irrelevant character named Lucian, and slowly she starts to fall in love with Tamlin. A lot of strange things happen during her stay there. There's this thing called Fire Night, and she meets this other High Lord from a different court named Rhysand, and he's sort of set up as like the bad boy / other point of the love triangle very early on in the story, but of course Feyre doesn't trust him because she doesn't trust anybody because she's like hardened by life. The whole spiel. More irrelevant stuff happens, and Tamlin and Feyre fall in love. Tamlin tells Feyre that he loves her, but Feyre, even though she does love him, doesn't say it out loud. And Tamlin, because of some impending danger, decides to send Feyre back to live with her family forever. But what Feyre didn't know was that behind the scenes this whole time there was this evil fairy named Amarantha. Amarantha basically has this huge vendetta against humans because her sister was betrayed by a human, and her logic says that because she hates humans, she's gonna enslave all of the fairies. Okay. She's also really mad at Tamlin because a while ago she tried to get him to be like her hoe, and he was like, I don't want to be your hoe. And she was like, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. And so she cursed them, and that's why they have to wear masks, because the curse happened at a masquerade party. so they're all stuck on there. And Amarantha has told Tamlin that the only way to break the curse is to find a human girl who killed a fairy out of hate, and she has to fall in love with him, and that's how you break the curse. Obviously this girl is Feyre, but Feyre never out loud said that she loved Tamlin, and Tamlin sent her away because he didn't want her to get hurt, because he knew that if Amarantha found out about her existence, she would kill Feyre. If Tamlin can't get Feyre to fall in love with him within a certain time frame, basically Amarantha will take all of him and all of his people hostage. I don't have the brain cells for this. So the curse doesn't get broken, Amarantha takes Tamlin and his people hostage. Feyre, back in the human world, finds out and decides to go and rescue him. Because Feyre, a human girl, is going up against a very powerful and old fairy with absolutely no plan. Sounds like a good idea. So Feyre goes to this place called Under the Mountain where Amarantha is, and keeping all these people hostage. Amarantha enslaves Feyre and gives her 3 trials, saying that if she passes these trials, she will set Tamlin and all the other people free. Or she can solve a riddle, and then she gives her this lame-ass riddle that is so easy to solve, yet somehow Feyre doesn't get it. And she says if you solve the riddle, automatic free pass, everyone goes free. Feyre does all these trials and completes them. She goes through a bunch of stress and trauma, she has to kill a bunch of people, but eventually she succeeds. And then Amarantha says, hey, you know what? I don't want to set everyone free, I'm just gonna kill Feyre instead. Plot. So while Amarantha is like beating the crap out of Feyre, Feyre has a moment of clarity, solves the riddle, and everyone gets to go free. Also, Amarantha gets killed by Tamlin. Does Tamlin kill her? Or does Rhysand kill her? I honestly don't know. Those two are like the same people. And that is basically the entire plot. So let's talk about the characters. I know people say that Feyre is like this revolutionary, badass girl, not like other girls, but honestly I found her, not gonna lie, really kind of Bella Swan-ish. She has this same setup, like she's plain, she's ordinary, she can't comprehend that anyone would ever love her because she is so plain and ordinary. She spends a lot of time in her own head thinking about how inferior she is. And like she's kind of obsessed with Tamlin, like in the same way that Bella was overly obsessed with Edward. Feyre even mentioned once that she would sell her soul for Tamlin. And that seems like a healthy relationship. It's just from the very beginning, it is pounded into readers that Feyre is like a good person, you know, like she cares for the poor. Even though her 2 sisters are like really mean to her, she still cares about them and provides for them, and she's constantly worrying about them. Feyre is just a saint, and the author really wants you to know that. And even though towards the end of the book, Feyre does like do something evil, like she kills people, but like she does it for the sake of saving everyone else, so like is it really that evil? There's another little character point about Feyre, and it's that she's very into painting, but this talent seems very irrelevant to like everything in the plot. It's good to give characters little talents like reading, painting, writing, talent with a bow and arrow, fighting, that sort of thing. But the general rule when it comes to writing is to only include things that are necessary to the plot. For example, I'm not the biggest fan of Cassandra Clare's books, but when you think about Clary in the Mortal Instruments, she's an artist, she draws. However, her talent of drawing comes in handy because she draws the runes. Like, the drawing is actually a part of her character and furthers the plot. Feyre's painting is just something that happens randomly and has nothing to do with the rest of the story. Like, she just paints for the heck of it and whatever. And the icing on the cake, anybody who follows me on TikTok will know that I always make a big deal out of this, and I found it. I was rereading the book and I found this line and I was like, oh my gosh, this proves it. This proves that Feyre, oh, this is like the accumulation of everything I hate in a female protagonist, and that is chapter 19. I wrote it down because it was so important. Chapter 19, he left me, and I took a gasping breath, not realizing I'd been holding it.
That's not good enough!
I don't know about Feyre, I just prefer characters that have a bit more emotional and moral depth. Like, I like characters that are a little bit more morally grey, and Feyre is just a saint all the time. Alright, now let's talk about Tamlin. There's a lot of controversies surrounding this book. People are like, Tamlin was so abusive in the first book, and honestly, I didn't see it. I didn't pick up on it the first time I read it. I didn't pick up on it the second time I read it. I didn't even pick up on it the third time I read it. I just don't see it. I will definitely admit that he has some controlling and possessive traits and scenes in the book, but I'd argue that he's no more possessive or controlling than literally any other YA love interest ever. So I guess I just don't really get why everyone's jumping on the Tamlin hate train and not the hate train of like every other YA love interest. Also, when it comes to Tamlin, he kind of annoys me due to the fact that he just doesn't really do anything in the book. Like, I mean, yeah, he's trying to get Feyre to fall in love with her, but then like, what else does he do? When he gets trapped under the mountain, he just like sits by Amarantha's side and doesn't give a shit. Like, what's his purpose other than to be, he's just a piece of eye candy. That's all he is, and I really don't understand his purpose in the story. And I guess that's another thing that I don't like about some characters is they are just there and there's no reason for them being there. Like, it's just... Moving on, let's talk about who I really want to talk about, and that is the High Lord of the Night Court himself, Rhysand. Feyre bumps into Rhysand at this party. He sort of like saves her from these guys who are like feeling her up, and he is immediately set up as the other point of the love triangle / bad boy. And this, I guess it was just kind of obvious because whenever there is a love triangle between like, you know, charming, like Prince Charming type guy versus bad boy always gets the girl. That's just how it goes. So I was kind of disappointed that it was so obvious. As soon as Rhysand came onto the scene, I was like, oh, she's gonna end up with Rhysand. Great. And I mean, honestly, I wasn't mad about it until all of the stuff happened under the mountain. For those of you who haven't read further in the series, this is like a tiny bit of a spoiler, so if you don't want to do that, you might want to click off this video. Basically, in the other two books, Feyre will end up with Rhys, and Tamlin gets sort of turned into this really emotionally and physically abusive person. And everyone who reads this series is like, oh my gosh, Rhys is so much better than Tamlin. He like treats Feyre the way she deserves to be treated. He's like feminist #1, blah, blah, blah. I'm like one of the few people who really disagree with Feyre and Rhysand's relationship, or just Rhysand's character in general, and the kind of message that he sends to young, impressionable readers. First of all, during like the second time Rhys and Feyre encountered each other, Rhys tried to break Feyre's mind and was only saved because Tamlin like begged him not to. When Feyre is enslaved under the mountain, she breaks her arm, she gets a fever, she's about to die, and Rhys is like, I'll heal you if you agree to spend 1 week a month with me in the Night Court for the rest of your life. And Feyre's like, well, I'm dying. And she really doesn't want to do it, but she has to, or else she's gonna die. Because of this deal that she strikes with Rhysand, Rhysand basically owns Feyre, and he spends his time basically completely controlling and manipulating and humiliating Feyre. Every night he dresses her up in very scantily clad clothes. He puts tattoos all over her body so that he can tell if other people touch her. He forces her, by controlling her mind, to drink fairy wine, which basically blacks her out for the entire night. And what she finds out is that while she was blacked out, she was dancing very provocatively for him, sitting on his lap. He was like touching her without her consent, and, you know, basically just being a hoe for Rhysand. This to me was just the main reason why I hated him. I was like, everyone's talking about how controlling and abusive Tamlin is, but here's Rhysand completely controlling and humiliating and degrading Feyre. What is the difference? The difference is Rhysand has a sub-story. Yes, it turns out he's not a bad guy. He was the good guy all along, and he just did all of this evil stuff to protect Feyre, because deep down, he cares. This is a part that I really disagree on, because as soon as Rhysand reveals that he is just like playing along with Amarantha and doing all of these evil things to keep his people safe, Feyre's like,
wow, I guess I'll just forgive you for everything that you did to me. Great.
And she starts to feel sorry for him. Let me just say, if you drug, manipulate, and abuse a girl, but you had good reasons, still doesn't make it okay.
That's not good enough.
And I just don't know if, since this novel is a YA novel, I really don't know if that's the kind of message that we as authors should be sending to young impressionable people, especially young impressionable girls, as that is the main demographic for these books. Because the story is told in first person from Feyre's point of view, and she herself is justifying why Rhysand is good. So you, in the mind of the main character, start to justify to yourself that Rhysand is a good guy. She says at the end of the chapter, she has this like revelation, and she's like,
oh, Rhysand could have demanded that I spend every week of the month with him for the rest of my life for the deal that we struck, but he only demanded 1 week. That makes him a good guy.
like, Feyre, wake up. This just whole cast of characters just seems really off and really bad. I don't know, all in all, I'm like a character-driven person. I don't really care about plot or world building. I'm here for the characters, and all of the characters in this book are just 2D and flat and just not there. Okay, moving away from the characters, now we're going to talk about just the writing in general. We're going to get into like the nitty-gritty analytic stuff. The first thing that becomes blatantly obvious in this book from chapter 1 is the presence of overwriting. This means that, in my opinion, Sarah J. Maas is just over-describing everything, and in places where she could have used just 1 paragraph, it takes her, what, like 3 pages. For example, in chapter 1, it begins with Feyre. She's waiting in the forest trying to hunt down some animals for food. It takes 6 paragraphs to explain that Feyre is cold and hungry. She mentions the snow countless times and the beauty of the snow countless times. She mentions her lack of food countless times. She mentions how the wind blows countless times. All the way through chapter 1, it's just a whole bunch of over-descriptive bullshit that doesn't need to be there. Another thing that really gets to me is that Sarah J. Maas's way of describing, she describes a lot in triplets. Like, she uses 3 adjectives in a row. For example, again in chapter 1, she's describing the wolf. You've got a flash of grey and white and black, a marvel of muscle and speed and brute strength, a coat of charcoal and obsidian and ivory. Like, they're all together, and every once in a while it's okay to use a triplet to describe stuff, but it's littered throughout the entire book and it just gets super repetitive and super boring. She also mentions being numb 3 times in the first chapter, and then once again at the very beginning of the second chapter, which continues on from the first chapter. Something that I learned when doing my degree for writing was to say as much as you can with as little words as possible, because the less words you use, the more impactful your writing becomes. For instance, if you have a character and in the text it says, "She was very beautiful." She was very beautiful, 4 words, doesn't seem very long, but is there a word that you can use that condenses very and beautiful into 1 word? So instead of saying she was very beautiful, you could say she was exquisite. And see, that sounds a little bit more punchy, you know, not so dragged on. The thing about the writing in this novel is we also spend a lot of time in Feyre's head. She's just mulling over things, she's thinking about things, and nothing really happens. Like, there's not a lot of action, it's just a lot of Feyre thinking. Running on from that, in place of action, there's also a ton of dialogue, and a lot of the character development is done through the dialogue. A tip that I also learned when I was at university was to show and not tell. Show us who the characters are, don't tell us. And Sarah J. Maas in this book just does a whole lot of telling. Like, the characters don't act to show the people they are, they just tell it through conversation. And a lot of this book is just characters having conversations with each other in order for us to learn things about the plot, and it's just not a very effective way of writing. The final thing that I didn't like in this book was the sex. I'm just personally not a fan of descriptive sex. It kind of makes me uncomfortable, I just don't like to read it, and most of the time, I feel like it doesn't need to be there. A lot of time when it comes to sex, it's just thrown in there for like shock value in sort of a 50 Shades of Grey situation. Like, if anyone's ever read 50 Shades of Grey, you'll know the book isn't good, but it's still a bestseller because it has sex in it. And since this book is classified as young adult, which can mean anything from like 13 years old to like 20 years old, I don't know if I'd feel comfortable with a 13-year-old or like even a 15, 16-year-old reading that in books. So if anything, I would prefer if this book was classified as adult fantasy. So to summarize, even though this book is like very popular and I know a lot of people like it, I didn't care for the writing style, I didn't care for the characters, I didn't care for the plot. I just thought it was very wishy-washy, very two-dimensional, very flat. I felt like it had potential, like the writing was trying to be good and it was just like not quite there, like there were just too many words for it to be good. But like I said at the beginning, just because I think this book is bad doesn't mean it is bad and doesn't mean people who like this book have bad taste. That's it for my first YouTube video, my review on A Court of Thorns and Roses. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, and if you don't already follow me on TikTok, go check it out. I post some pretty cool stuff on there. Drop a comment down below about your opinions about this book. Remember, debate, not hate. And keep an eye out for more videos in the future. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you later.